Wilson? Wilson?
Do you think this is wise, sir?
It seems to me that I can never, ever be able to get away from Mannering and the others. I mean, I'm with him all day at the bank.
This is my chief clerk, Mr. Wilson.
And on parade with him in the evenings.
You're not going to do anything too hasty, are you?
As you see, I'd much rather be in a nice, cosy cocktail bar, listening to a little Noel Coward playing on the piano.
John Le Mesurier, who was so sort of laid back.
Well, put that down. You're supposed to be watching the prisoners.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I beg your pardon.
And couldn't care less about all that.
Did we have to drag this great big gun out here with us, sir? I mean, it's an awful fag.
An awful fag? We're on active service, Wilson.
I think it's an absolutely brilliant idea that they had a very posh sergeant.
Being a member of the aristocracy explains quite a lot about your character.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. They're an ambling, muddle-headed lot.
John Le Mesurier, that terribly laid-back public school sort of persona, is this really wise and all that?
Do you think this is wise? Do you think this is wise, sir? Do you think that's wise?
Oh, just get on with it, Wilson.
And Captain Mannering, obviously straight out of the grammar school and very sort of, very conscious of the fact that John Le Mesurier is really a different class from him.
Oh, you'll stick up for him, won't you? Both went to public schools, didn't you?
No, I can't help feeling, sir, you've got a little bit of a chip on your shoulder about that.
There's no chip on my shoulder, Wilson. I'll tell you what there is on my shoulder, though. 3 pips, and don't you forget it.
And I think that was one of the key things. It was certainly one of the things that attracted me to going into the series.
The original idea that Jimmy came up with was the memoirs of a Home Guard sergeant.
Sergeant Wilson was always meant to be a bit la-di-da. There was no question he was anything else.
Jimmy was very anxious that Arthur Lowe should play the sergeant. Then Michael Mills came up with the idea, said, you should get John Mesurier to play the officer, because he suffers so marvellously. And by some miracle, we came up with the idea of Arthur Lowe being the officer and John Le Mesurier the sergeant, because I couldn't stomach the idea of John Le Mesurier being the officer. You know, he's so laid back and so laconic in his attitude that it would have been chaos, you know.
Please, just one at a time.
One at a time, as he said.
I'm away for a few short hours, and you let the entire unit crumble before your eyes.
A great deal of what you see in Wilson was there in Le Mesurier. He did have a privileged upbringing. He did go to public school. He was as urbane and relaxed and insouciant as Wilson. For example, when he was called up, he turned up at the barracks with some golf clubs in his boot and his breath smelling of champagne cocktails. And he just sort of wandered through the war, rather like Wilson wandered through the Home Guard.
And I had a very comfortable war. No real hardships at all. Ended up on the northwest frontier. You know, where they fire shots and friendliness, really.
Like he'd done in the army, he left his buttons undone.
You wear that uniform like a sack of porridge.
And he had his cap slightly askew. And he had that sleepy-eyed, slyly mischievous personality as John Le Mesurier had. And it was a very neat fit in the end.
But John Le Mesurier was not a snob, strangely enough. He was, you know, he always treated everybody with great dignity.
Now, listen to me, you German fellows. Would you mind getting up against the wall and putting your hands up, please? The sort of parts I've played are a lot of professional people, like lawyers, solicitors, soldiers, sailors, all sorts, doctors, psychiatrists, and so on. And now I'm playing a sergeant.
It was written all over him, you know. He just knew the right things to say, the right things to wear.
Well, show me in King's Regulations where it says that a sergeant is not allowed to wear a monocle.
I don't have to show you. Who ever heard of a sergeant wearing a monocle?
And he loved, as I say, cricket. He was a very good cricket player. And I believe he was a good oarsman, too. And he represented a generation I think has gone forever now.
Just a minute. You haven't been introduced to this lady.
Listen, buddy. Why don't you go take a powder, huh?
John had an amazing attraction for the ladies.
Le Mesurier undoubtedly had a kind of inbuilt charm that he could turn on and just radiate, the same as Wilson did.
That uniform really does suit you awfully well. I say, what a very pretty brooch you've got on. It seems to match the colouring of your hair so well. That little belt you're wearing, yes, it makes your waist look absolutely tiny.
That will be all, nurse. Thank you.
And you can see how he won over Pike's mother with the same technique.
Now, Mavis, please, please.
Oh, Frank, just telephone me. I knew you could do it, Arthur. Oh!
I mean, I knew and worked with him years before Dad's Army was ever thought of. I knew him at the Players Theatre when he was married to Hattie Jakes. But I had already done a sitcom with him and Hattie Jakes about this family that ran a show on a pier. It was a children's series, actually. But that was when I first worked with him.
I mean, unfortunately, at the moment, as you know, there is no film industry, or very little in this country, which is very sad. There are 1 or 2 pictures being made, but there was a time when I was involved in a lot, thanks very much to the Bolting brothers.
John Le Mesurier had been in nearly every film you'd ever seen. He was a very experienced actor.
I was terrified of having a scene by myself with John Le Mesurier at the start because it'd been nothing like you rehearsed.
Uncle Arthur, wake up. Wake up, Uncle Arthur, wake up.
He'd be in the same place. He'd sit down at the same time. But he'd play the same scene seemingly totally different. And why did we come to rehearsals? It wasn't just to learn the lines.
I don't know. Frank,
Wake up.
Frank, would you please go back to sleep?
Uncle Arthur, there's someone coming up the stairs.
What?
Listen.
But pretty soon, got to look forward to playing with it.
I bet you're a proud father.
I don't quite follow you.
Well, your son becoming an officer.
Yes, well, he's he's not my son, you see.
John would play lines with meaningless intonations and interpretations, and that doesn't mean that at all, but it worked.
If it was up to me, I'd let you come in, but you see, he's the, isn't he? He's the officer.
A lot of them used to get on my nerves because they wouldn't take it seriously. John Le Mesurier say, "Oh, it's not Holy Writ, old boy."
I had to do this Berkeley Square, Nightingale in Berkeley Square thing in the show, the theatre show of Dad's Army. They helped me through it, the orchestra, as I think, if you listen, you will hear. The streets of town were paved with stars. It was such a romantic affair. And as we kissed, said goodnight, a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. I know, as I was there.
Again, it's an example of him being quite eccentric in the delivery and laughing about it. A nightingale sang in Berkeley Square, and just finding it just slightly amusing and off-centre. And it was delightful. That was an enormous plus to them doing the stage show.
When we were on tour, I remember John once said, "What do you do about your dirty washing?" And I said, "Well, I find a laundry that'll do it in the week, and I take it in and I collect it at the end of the week." So I said, "What do you do, John?" And he said, "Well, I just sort of leave it around my room, and somehow some kind person always does it for me." And that was it. That was John. Be helpless and people come to your rescue.
There we are, Mr. Wilson. That's better. Now the hairiness of your surge is all pointing in the same direction. We can't have you going on a highly important parade with your surge hairiness all going in the wrong direction, can
No, we can't. Thank you so much, Georgie. I'm sure it's absolutely delightful. You see, in Dad's Army, it was really an extension of oneself, as I say. But on the other hand, whatever it is you do, whether you're playing something like Dennis Potter's Traitor and various other plays I've been involved in, or some good films that I've been involved in, don't forget those, but a little bit of yourself, a little bit of the actor, whatever it is you're playing, whether it's sort of heavy drama or light comedy, it's got to come through.